Okay, good morning everyone. So welcome to this special meeting of the Transport and Traffic and Transportation Cabinet Decision meeting. I'm sure you've probably realised I am not Councillor Lynn Stagg, but I'm taking this meeting as Councillor Stagg has a conflict of interest in relation to item 3 of the agenda. To start with, could we just do a round the table so that people in the gallery, as well as anybody watching at home this morning, know who is speaking and who we are. So I'm Ben Dowling. I'm normally the Cabinet Member for Planning, Regeneration and Economic Development in the City, and here instead of Councillor Lynn Stagg.
I'm Councillor Simon Bosher. I'm the Conservative spokesman for Traffic and Transportation.
I am Councillor Yahya Chaudhry from the Labour Party.
Wayne Layton, Finance Manager for Portsmouth City Council.
Tristan Samuels, Director of Regeneration, Portsmouth City Council.
Nikki Musson, Transport Planning Team and Traffic Regulation Orders.
Pam Turton, Assistant Director, Transport.
Felicity Tibbury, Transport Planning Manager.
Joe Moore-Smith, Democratic Services.
Okay, thank you everyone. So do we have any apologies? It looks like everyone is here. Wonderful. Declarations of members' interests. I do not have any. Colleagues? No? Wonderful. Item 3, revised residence parking programme of consultation. The process we're going to take is I'm going to ask colleagues to my right to introduce the report. I will then take the deputations from the public and councillors. Despite having so many people coming forward to speak today, I've decided that we'll stick to the 6-minute rule, so you can speak for up to 6 minutes. That's not to say that you have to speak for the full 6 minutes. It is up to you. I have quite the reputation within the council of insisting that people should only speak for the amount of time they actually need to, and I don't think I've ever spoken for a full 6 minutes in any council meeting ever. But it's entirely up to you. So you do theoretically have up to 6 minutes. Pam, are you introducing this report? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Just 2 notes before I present the report, if that's okay. It was firstly to highlight that there is a correction sheet which clarifies some of the figures which are with reference to previous surveys undertaken with the MC Bramble Road area, and there should be copies of that available to you. And the second note is that the Residents Parking Programme and Update Report, scheduled for consideration at the Traffic and Transportation Committee on the 12th of July, was withdrawn and is not being considered further. So I would now like to present Agenda Item 3, the report entitled Revised Residents Parking Programme of Consultation. Our Transport Planning Manager, Transport Planning Officer and Finance Manager are here to represent the detailed specialisms relevant to this report. So this report has been drafted in accordance with the new administration's priorities following the change in council administration in May 2018. The report recommends firstly noting the progress on the previous approved residents parking programme as detailed in the shaded out boxes on pages 5, 6 and 7 under paragraph 4.8. The second recommendation is that the revised programme of consultation with residents is confirmed and the consultation on each area is progressed. This report does not determine whether new parking zones will be implemented, the boundaries or the operational hours of the zones, but seeks authorisation to consult with the residents in each of the identified areas. Section 4 of the report details the consultation process and explains the 2 approaches which will be undertaken. Those zones that have been subject to a formal or informal consultation at least twice within the last 5 years, for example MB and MC, will not be subject to a further informal consultation and therefore will be starting at stage 2 of the process outlined in section 4.2.1. Those working and living in those zones will have the opportunity to comment fully through the statutory traffic regulation order process, which is open for 21 days and will be provided with information on residents parking ahead of the commencement of that consultation. The remaining programme will be subject to an informal consultation first, so starting at stage 1 of the process outlined in section 4.2.1. Following consultation, a report will be brought back to this forum to determine the next steps for each zone. Because the next steps of the programme are fully dependent on the consultation responses received for each zone, it is not possible at this time to determine timescales or specifics regarding the potential implementation of zones. It is proposed that an interim report is brought back to this forum after the consultation on the area identified as MD zone within the report to reconfirm the programme and note progress to date.
Thank you very much, Pam. Okay, we'll take deputations now. The normal order is to take members of the public, followed by members of the council, and for those to come in the order that people asked to speak. I've had a request from Councillor Horton if she could go ahead of everyone else. The reason for this is that today is actually her nan's 100th birthday, and I'm sure we can all celebrate that. I think that's, of all the reasons to ask to go first in order that she can get away, I think that's a pretty good one, and I hope people will be understanding of that. So could we have Councillor Horton come forward first? And happy birthday to your nan.
Thank you very much for allowing me to go first. I've managed to sneak out and I'm hoping that my mother hasn't noticed. Okay. Right. I think one thing that everyone can agree is that parking in the city of this size and population is an important and key issue. We interestingly live in a time when people love their cars and more people can afford them, yet we strive for cleaner, greener and car reduction. We also want to represent and prioritise residents, but we also acknowledge the contribution that tourists and students make to our city. And we are where we are today as a result of historic and well-meaning decisions that have been made using a principle of surveying residents after engagement with them to decide whether some kind of restriction could give them preferential treatment above others. This is a system that's been good for residents all over the city, from the north of the city right the way through to the south, every zone that's been introduced. As far as I'm aware, the only zones that have been completely deleted without proper consultation is the MB and MC zones, a decision that was done without the wishes or the requests of any residents. So I'm here today as councillor for Central Southsea to represent the residents in my ward. In many ways, I'm representing them on two simultaneous issues. One is actually the parking itself, and a lot of people are new to the ward and so come to me with issues around parking, not realising the history of it. And the other thing is about undoing an injustice that was served to them in a really unfair manner. So in actual fact, Central Southsea's situation, or MC I should say, situation is a bit different from the rest of the proposals in the sense that the area in question has been surveyed many times, has had the zones, wanted to keep the zones, had them taken away, surveyed to see whether this was a popular move, said that it wasn't popular, and please can we have them back, and then told no. So after 2011, when the original MB zone was established, and I think it's really important to state that this was not established as a result of displacement. It was established because of a specific issue around commuters near the station, in much the same way that last year a zone was amended to cater for students parking in Old Portsmouth to go to lectures and things. And that was based on a response of 112 residents. But the model of the original MB zone is not one actually I would have chosen, having lived in London where 1 or 2 hour morning residents only zone would deal adequately with it. And probably less displacement would have created into MC, which was then created in 2014. But the announcement these two zones were to be suspended was made in July 2014 on an experimental order, which as far as I can see in other cases is used in emergency situations around health and safety grounds, for example, near a school crossing or something like that. Despite musings that the MC zone was then immediately causing displacement, between the date the MC zone came in and the suspension, there were 60 complaints to the council. But anyway, the suspension started in 2014. permanently removed on the 26th of November 2015, based on a council survey that 27 people responded to, 25 of them wanting it reinstated. Now, first, this seems a ridiculously low response rate to a survey when a month earlier, in October 2014, I presented a petition to full council on the same issue with hundreds and hundreds of signatures on it. I've yet to actually find a resident that remembers being surveyed in this, but even if this disappointing level of engagement is accurate, then a whopping 93% response to keep the zones seems unfair to permanently delete them when other zones have been introduced on significantly less percentages. Many residents in MB/MC at the time felt that the deletion of the zones was totally unfair, that it singled out MB and MC with no evidence that they were causing any more problems than anywhere else, was based on a lack of information, and it was purported to be creating problems of wasted space and take-up rates, which were presented as out of proportion compared with other zones. Now, these accusations were ably refuted by a piece of work by Matt Smart, a resident who cannot be here today, but who produced a really well-researched report, and it's in the papers for the council meeting on Tuesday, the 14th of October 2014, where he showed that if you were looking at wasted spaces and take-up rates, in actual fact, MB and MC were not as bad as at least 10 to 14 other zones, depending on which way you looked at it. Since then, there's not been a week when I haven't had several emails about the problems that residents are experiencing, like a lot of other people, especially during university term time. But these are, we need to remember, and it's well-versed examples of single parents who don't know whether to drop the kids off or the shopping off, disabled people unable to socialise, frustrated people driving around after a long day's work. The Lib Dems did a survey last summer in my wards and in other wards, but we always intended it to be part survey and part consultation, so it presented a lot of ideas that we wanted to put in our manifesto. We had a phenomenal response across the city. Thousands responded in a really engaged and informative way. I read and responded to everyone in Central Southsea. There were over 600 households who responded in MB and MC, and of those responses, 87% saying that there was a parking problem in their road, and 76% saying that they wanted the zones back. So it seems that decision made in 2014 is no more popular now than it was then. If we have a system for deciding how and why we introduce zones, then it should be administered fairly and respected. I think I have enough evidence to say that residents of my ward, Central Southsea, should at least have the opportunity to say yet again whether they want their zone back after it was so undemocratically removed.
Thank you, Councillor Horton. Just for other people's reference, that was 6 minutes and about 10 seconds, so that's pretty good timing. If we could all try to not go too much over that, that would be brilliant. So, possibly. Okay, so we'll move on to members of the public, and again, this is in the order that we received the request, so there's no preferential treatment with the exception of Councillor Horton on this occasion. So, is Mr. Terry Barfoot in the room? Thank you very much, sir. Can do. No, I think it's okay. Okay, when you're ready, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I speak as spokesman for the residents of Mulberry Lane and the Close in Cosham, PO6 2QU. On the 28th of February this year, 24 out of 30 households, that is 80% in Mulberry Lane, and 11 out of 16 households, that is 70% in the Close, signed a formal letter of complaint that was sent to the Chief Executive of Portsmouth City Council because of our ongoing problems with all-day parking. This all-day parking is largely the result of administrative staff from Queen Alexandra Hospital choosing not to use their park and ride option, and they are allowed to park in our road, but they're not allowed to park in other roads in the area around the Havant Road because of zones that have quite reasonably been awarded since December 2016 and those that have existed since 2010. Our pleas for a residence parking zone have been ignored over a period of 18 months. We're the nearest road to Cosham Centre off the Havant Road that still allows unlimited parking. And we now have zones awarded at either end of our road, into BC in the north, into BF in the west. And the reason it's north and west is our road has a blind bend in it, which is another cause of problems. Day after day, week after week, our road is full by 8:30 a.m. and through the rest of the day, and when gaps do appear, they're often filled by people working on later shifts. We're very well informed by now, but all our attempts to put forward a reasoned case have fallen on deaf ears. There's been a culture at Portsmouth City Council of we know what is best for you. And we've been told we do not deserve to have a zone. The reasons we want a zone, however, are precisely the same as those that have led to the granting of zones BC and BF. And this is therefore quite different from the situation in much of Portsea Island, because the pressures are caused upon us by planning decisions that have led to our road being targeted as a free long-stay car park. During his tenure as Cabinet member, Councillor Bosher met with us and kindly arranged for a survey of residents to be carried out by the ward councillors. This was begun on the 2nd of November, but it was never completed, and that is why we were compelled to make our complaint. We feel that we have been poorly treated by both members and officers, and we have therefore been encouraged by the following statement in the manifesto of the Liberal Democrat Party. The previous administration told people who voted for parking permits they cannot have them. This must stop. Moreover, we are further encouraged by this statement from Councillor Gerald Vernon-Jackson, the leader of Portsmouth City Council, as quoted in the news on the 18th of June. If people ask for permit schemes, then that is what we will give them. For 18 months, our road has been a free long-stay car park. All we ask is that measures are taken to stop this long-stay parking, both the all-day parking and the longer-term parking lasting weeks on end, by people going off in taxis and on holiday, or by motor traders who are often parking untaxed vehicles in the road because they cannot park them in neighbouring roads. This is all happening regularly. We are not a gated community, and limited period parking is entirely reasonable. The purpose of the presentation today, therefore, is to raise the issue of the injustice that we, and perhaps various other roads too, continue to suffer. We do not expect a detailed consideration of it at this stage, of course, but I would remind the meeting that it's 18 months since we lodged an application and we are no further advanced. We pay our council tax, we ask for a level playing field. And the reason for the presentation now is to state our belief that there needs to be a change of culture at Portsmouth City Council. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barfoot. Could I now ask Councillor Stubbs to come forward, as I believe he is reading a deputation on behalf of a Mr. Jerry Brown, who cannot be with us today.
Thank you very much, and I'm reading this on behalf of Jerry Brown, who's a resident in Marion Road. Openness, transparency, inclusion, consultation. The words used by the leader of the council at the most recent full council meeting. Before we talk about the proposed changes, let's look at the cause. We have too many cars, vehicles perhaps, for the amount of parking spaces. No matter what you do, you can't manage spaces into places where there just isn't the ability to put them. Mitigation is the best that can be done without addressing the cause of the demand, yet up till now the impact has simply been to move the problem around and people unable to use spaces in RPZs that have too few registered users. Making it easier to park in one street inevitably means you make it more difficult to park in another. New RPZs do not reduce the number of vehicles in the city, they simply move them on to the remaining non-RPZ areas. This proposal uses the November 2015 paper as a starting point, and that paper says that reintroducing MB and MC will lead to displacement, and this is what happened last time. It's claimed that this meeting is only to agree the schedule for consultations, but it also includes the new idea of skipping the informal PCC consultation and moving directly to implementation by TRO, including the statutory minimum TRO consultation. I strongly request that where there is displacement reported, the surveys will be done in weeks, not months. Promptly is a fairly subjective timetable. The report says that the previous MB and MC zones will be reinstated without a survey, and that the promised consultation is not needed because they have been surveyed before. Yet the administration must know how many more HMO licences have been granted in those streets and the impact of student cars where there are many HMOs. Not only that, the zones have been made larger to include areas previously surveyed but not in favour of an RPZ at the time. If there has been no subsequent survey, on what is the decision now to include them now being based? Surely it should be if an area voted in favour when they were surveyed. Otherwise, they have been forced to have something for which there is no evidence to show that they have asked for, and that last time around they were excluded, yet there has been no material change since then. Worse still, the areas massively affected by the new zones, MB and MC and MD, don't get consulted at all. This is unacceptable. All of the vehicles that cannot park where they used to will now park in the remaining areas that are not RPZs. These areas are getting fewer and smaller and therefore will eventually become worse than the current problem areas fixed by the proposed RPZs. This item should not be approved. A proper survey should be carried out by officers, a survey that this time includes the extensions of MB and MC. Any survey regarding RPZs must include the areas not in the proposed RPZ but will be hit by displacement, and asking if the proposed RBZ causes your streets to be very heavily congested with displaced vehicles that don't have a permit, would you wish your street to become an RPZ at the same time? To be clear, if the MB, MC and MD zones are implemented, all vehicles that cannot afford a permit or cannot get one will be forced onto the streets east of Waverley Road and south of Albert Road, in other words into Craneswater and East Southsea, and done without a survey. The proposal notes that the TRO is, quote, the survey, quote, these remaining non-RPZ streets will now take all of the problem traffic from the new RPZ streets. For those of us living in MF, where we have significant parking issues during the summer because people do not want to pay to park on the seafront, I think we recognise this summer-only issue when we moved in. But now having the displacement from MC and MD means our roads would already have more vehicles that can't get or don't want a permit. And now there's less chance of being able to park elsewhere, as non-RPZ areas will get smaller and more congested with displaced vehicles. And those who don't want to buy seafront parking, there is nowhere else for us to go. I say that the proposal sets out a TRO method of implementation is acceptable for reinstating MB and MC, but I also claim that the additions to MB and MC do not meet the criteria of, quote, having been surveyed twice in the last 5 years, quote, because when surveyed they did not want an RPZ and therefore they need to be surveyed again along with the whole of the proposed zones, as surveying only a part of a zone is fraught with problems. The report says, quote, following feedback from residents of Jubilee Road, Bath Road and other roads east of Francis Avenue, an extension will be made to the MB and MC zone boundaries, quote. Where is this feedback? Is it merely one-party anecdotal or the result of a formal PCC process? Can we see the survey that is supporting this? For those east of Winter Road and those south of Highland Road, the brunt of the displacement will land on their doorstep when NF and ME are implemented. I am therefore asking for a number of things to happen. That residents and streets that are likely to be affected by primary and secondary displacement be included in the survey with the questions outlined above. That permit holders will be automatically allowed to park in adjacent parking zones, that the timetable for consultation be published as part of the consultation process being approved, and that residents impacted by displacement be prioritised in future RPZ implementation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stubbs. Could we now move to Mr. Terry Norton?
Thank you. I notice that Councillor Horton has left, so perhaps you can send our regards to her mother on her 100th birthday, and it'd be interesting to know whether she still receives a letter from the Queen. Right, I'm speaking today on behalf of residents in Baffins, not only as a community campaigner, but as a lifelong resident myself. And this is an issue that residents are engaged in. They are very vocal on it, especially people who not normally are usually very non-political. They are taking an interest in this, and it's because it affects their day-to-day life. It's not impossible, but it's very difficult to park in Baffins after 7 o'clock in the evening, and for many families and residents this means that they do not socialise, they don't go and visit their friends and families, instead they stay in, and many residents have said that they feel like hermits at times because they don't want to risk not being able to park. It also raises the issue for those who do have to go out in the evening, wives, daughters, travelling large distances back to their homes alone in the evening, and to think that placing a zone in the area that is not supposedly going to cause displacement is completely naive. It's going to make the parking situation worse for the majority of our ward. And it's important to highlight that. I think also there is a matter of consultation here. Residents are constantly bombarded in our ward with survey after survey after survey, appearing to take an issue like parking and act on it, only to find out that when a zone is proposed, it's using data which is between 4 and 10 years old. Now that raises the question of what is the purpose of the surveys that are coming through our doors during that time. Is it for political point scoring? Is it to appear active on an issue? Or in fact, as many residents have raised, is it simply to data harvest? So that is a concern. Why are we using data which is so old? During that time, between 4 and 10 years, people's personal circumstances can change. People can move home, and actually their opinion can also change as well. So I don't think the consultation has been handled particularly well there, and as do many residents. Also, there's the issue of Southgain here. It's interesting to hear Councillor Horton speak about injustice when there's no, it's not disguised the fact that this is in fact the zone that's being proposed is the area in which the Traffic and Transportation Chair lives. So why is that the only area in the ward that is being proposed here? I suspect that it's probably because promises have been made during campaigns, and now there's an attempt to kind of push that through to appear good on someone's word. But I think as councillors, residents, they actually, they have faith in their councillors. They want them to appear fair. They want them to represent the whole of the ward, not just a particular area where they live. So there is some concern there from residents. This also moves on to why this is a focus at the moment and not finding additional spaces in other areas across the Baffins ward. There is a car park adjacent to the prison that is empty most days, every evening, and has been for a number of years. Why are efforts not being made to open that to the public? I know that the administration, or certainly the councillors in the ward, have opposed redevelopment plans that will produce more parking in the area. Why is that happening when we're looking to put a resident parking zone in a very small area of the ward? And again, their residents are concerned, especially by Dover Road, that what this will cause is people parking in their street, popping over the bridge, and then going to visit family members, or actually living and avoiding paying the charges to visit over in the HC ward. So there are a number of concerns. As well as that, we are an island city. I think we have a duty to support neighbouring wards. We share facilities, we share shops, parks, etc. And placing a parking zone in an area where there are very few parking zones is going to do nothing but frustrate neighbouring wards and cause some tension. Overall, I don't think this should go through. I think the whole process is neither liberal nor democratic, and for that reason, I'm opposing it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Norton. I'll be sure to pass on your congratulations to Susie's nan, and I can assure you I have seen the card from the Queen, and it's lovely. Could I ask, is it Mr. Mottershead to come forward? Okay. Okay. Well, pleased to have you with us, sir. We'll move on to Mr. Nicholson. Sorry, sir. Can I ask you to use the microphone just for everyone's benefit?
Can you hear me now? Yeah. Perfect.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Susie's already articulated the position regarding the withdrawal of zone without any consultation, so I won't touch on that. Rather, what I would like to just I'm not going to use any of my 6 minutes, just probably 1 minute. It's just give you a view from what it's like being a resident of Lawn Road, which is linked to Havelock Road, Livingston Road, and that whole surrounding area. Currently, we have a lot of displacement from the St David's and St Andrews adjacent streets from there. So the knock-on effect is you can rarely get parking anything past 7 o'clock in the evening. That's probably coupled with a number of issues, and I've become one of those neighbours which is constantly challenging people around parking, which I never thought I would become. But there are people that are holiday makers who, in the last 2 weeks, 3 individuals, and I've asked them, and they quite openly admit to it, is that they're parking there in order to get a taxi, to go down to the Isle of Wight, and then get the ferry over. And that's 3 occasions in the last 2 weeks, which is a constant throughout the whole of the year. We have a young family. I have 2 young boys. My wife, I work away often. My wife is unable to park with shopping. She's unable, as Susie said, where, what do? Do you drop the children off? Do you then look for a space and leave them there at the house? Or do you try and park within a 1 kilometre distance and then walk them back after a full day of school and before dinner? Probably the biggest consequence, or certainly what I've noticed in the last 12 months, is during the weekend after 7 o'clock it is impossible to get parking. Therefore my record is to drive around for 1 hour and 10 minutes in order to try and find a space, give up, and then park in one of the flat spaces, hoping that that's not taken by somebody, and risk the penalty of a £90 wheel clamp. Worse than that is that certain residents and certain individuals are then parking on the streets on the corner of Lawn Road and Havelock Road, which impacts any fire engines. They can't get past. So if my house is burning, I won't at the weekend be able to save the family, or the police, rather the ambulance and fire engines won't be able to get past because there is no distance to get a large vehicle round. And I think that for me is one of the biggest consequences. It's now beginning to endanger life, and that sounds like a very dramatic statement to make, but we're seeing that throughout the whole of the street, and that's a real risk. And it's just a plea that you've taken away residents' parking in 2015 without any consultation whatsoever. There's a real demand from local residents to have it reinstated. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Could we have Mr. Messiah come forward?
Two, 1, 2. Hear me? Yep.
Certainly can. Thank you.
Well, I suppose I should declare my interest. I'm here to speak for those that want the MB and MC parking zones reinstated. And, but I've written it all down, so let's go, yeah? When the MB and MC parking zones were introduced, those of us who own vehicles registered to an address within the MB and MC zones said a massive thank you to Portsmouth City Council. Why? Well, reason 1. We no longer needed to drive around and around, up and down, street after street, hoping and praying to come across a vehicle which was about to depart. Reason 2. We no longer needed to tolerate those who live outside the MB and MC zones using the areas within the areas inside the MB and MC zones as a free long stay car park. Reason 3. We said thank you to Portsmouth City Council because now we were no longer forced into a position of parking our vehicles on double yellow lines because there was nowhere else to park. We said a massive thank you to Portsmouth City Council because now, in the roads and streets covered by the zones, there was space to pull into curbs and let oncoming traffic pass, which also meant drivers did not have to reverse their vehicle onto a main road so they can let oncoming traffic past. we said a massive thank you to Portsmouth City Council because now the possibility of damaging other vehicles when reversing was dramatically reduced. The parking zone cut drastically the number of gridlock situations. You know the type of situations where two cars come in from opposite ends of the streets and they meet in the middle, they turn off their engine and they just sit there and do nothing for half an hour. The parking zones cut that down drastically. And we also said a massive thank you to Portsmouth City Council because now the emergency services could park when they're on emergency calls. They could actually park in the street rather than blocking the road. I think what I'm trying to say here is that yes, for those people who live and own vehicles in the MB and MC zones, problems related to parking and more were solved. Thank you. But now, in 2015, Portsmouth City Council took away the MB and MC parking zones on the grounds that the MB and MC zones did not work for those in the surrounding streets. Well, I've lived in Manners Road for 30 years. I've witnessed Portsmouth City Council wrestle with the area's parking needs, and in my opinion, for the residents of the MB and MC parking zones, Portsmouth City Council solved their parking problem. Portsmouth City Council's only mistake was to leave out the surrounding streets. So I'm here to say, please bring it back. Bring back MB and MC parking zones with their original criteria, but this time include those streets you left out. That's what I'm here to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sire. We're now going... Oh, apologies. We've got two requests that came in slightly later than the deadline, which is officially midday yesterday. But given the importance of this topic, I've decided to let those two people come forward and speak. So I've got Mr. Charles Burns next. Charles, I saw you come in early. There we go.
Thank you, Councillor. I live in Central Southsea. I certainly benefited then when MB Zone was in operation. Susie Horton gave a good summary of the situation of MB and MC since they were introduced or started being introduced in 2011. I go back a bit further than that. I go back to the early noughties, where there were successive consultations leading to a large one of over 12,000 letterboxes, with the majority in favour of resident parking zones. And then the 12,000 letterboxes were in central Southsea and south of Albert Road, larger areas. People have moved since then, but my suggestion is that there should be a survey of the larger area, really following up other deputations that all the areas which aren't covered by resident parking zones should be covered now, looked at now. In central Southsea and south of that, it would be the proposed reintroduction of zones B and C, looking at D, E, F, and probably bringing the existing small zone A back into that computation as well, and looking at it perhaps to introduce just 2 or 3 larger zones, as was a possible outcome of the 2005 consultation. The alternative is to do nothing. The choice has to be yours, Councillor. Brave whichever one you take, but it's really, in my view, and in 2005 I should add that I was the secretary of this then operating Central Southsea Neighbourhood Forum, and in the introduction of Zone MC, then I was involved as secretary of the Federation of Small Businesses, and the introduction of that as a knock-on effect of what had happened with the displacement from MB, and well aware of the concerns from other people and businesses elsewhere in Southsea about displacement, hence suggesting now it's either got to be everything or nothing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Burns. When I first got involved in politics, someone astutely pointed out to me that I was either brave or bonkers, so thank you for suggesting that I am the former. The final deputation from the public is Amy, and apologies if I pronounce this wrong, Was. WASS, who appears to be not here. Do we have any communication from this person?
No, but it was a late request that she would hope to come along, but obviously hasn't been able to make it.
Okay. If Miss Wass does appear whilst we're still on the item of deputations going forward, then we'll get her to speak after councillors have spoken. So we'll move on to members who've asked to speak, starting with Councillor Dave Ashmore from Fratton Ward.
Hello. It's a bit awkward, really. There's a lot of people have already said things I was going to cover anyway, so I won't waste anyone's time and go over it. But I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't. I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't mention stuff about Fratton. And I've looked through the report there, and I just want to clarify one thing and try and get some clarification on two other things in the meeting. One, I want to clarify that in the GA zone in Fratton, it looks like in the 2015 survey that people voted overwhelmingly to get rid of it. But that wasn't a like-for-like survey. That was a survey done when it was the then administration wanted to reduce the GA parking zone to a few streets around the train station and only have it going from 11 in the morning till 1 p.m. And I think the figure floated was something like £50 for the charge. So that's what people opposed on that one. So it looks like they opposed it in GA, but it wasn't a like-for-like survey. So I just wanted to clarify that. I thought it'd be important to put that into context for my ward. The other thing is, for clarification on it, is there's been a lot of people in the north of my ward which don't have residence parking, and they've noticed some of the proposals and the talks about putting one in, round about the Copner areas, the Baffins area, that might impact on them. What I'm heartened to see in the report is it does mention prompt consultation of the adjacent wards to anyone that, if one goes ahead, they will be consulted on it. I was just wondering, when it says prompt, I think it was mentioned in the deputation by Jerry Brown as well, if there's a time scale on that, just to reassure the residents there, if something goes ahead, what kind of time scale that's going to be. And the other thing I was going to mention is residence parking zones. They're not the answer to everything. They're, strategically placed zones do work. They have worked. People like them. But there has to be other alternatives looked at. So, this is a decision meeting it's a bit different in that there's no decision to implement something or get rid of something. It's a decision about getting the ball rolling and seeing if you can make a decision later on. So there'll be nothing set up tomorrow or next week or something. But just some clarification that it won't be at the expense of alternatives, things to be, I think they've been mentioned before about, using car parks and stuff, but, maybe reviewing the double yellows in the city, seeing if they're needed, seeing if there can be strategic things on that. I think someone's mentioned maybe using schools overnight. I don't know how that would work. It's been mentioned, and I've mentioned before, like car parks for retail and businesses and stuff, if they can be used when they're out of hours. Anything, so it's not just parking zones. If they are implemented, it won't stop these alternatives being looked at. That's all I wanted to say, basically. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ashmore. Can I ask Councillor Stubbs to come forward from Eastney and Craneswater Ward?
Okay, thank you. So in a number of the previous deputations, we've heard odd bits about specific schemes, certainly one in Cosham and so forth. Honestly, the one in Cosham, I don't know much of the details about that. Really, I'm confining my remarks primarily to the situation in Southsea, which I'm far more familiar. And I really think that what we're really talking about, what all of this comes down to, is it all boils down to MB and MC. And let's remind ourselves about the history of MB and MC. So the MB zone, which covers streets around Orchard Road, was introduced 2013, I think it was. And look at the numbers which applied at the time. There are 1,150 spaces and 800 permits issued, which meant that in the inconceivable situation where everybody was at home at the same time, you still have 350 empty spaces. The actual reality of it was that the roads were empty, that there were empty spaces. More than half the streets were empty all the time. It was like a scene out of 1975 before people owned cars. And it was lovely for the people living in there. But the people living in the surrounding streets, it wasn't so good because those cars didn't go away, they just moved. And so there was a huge displacement problem in areas outside, which then led soon after to MC, which then created further displacement beyond that. And now you're in a rush to bring it back, and you're in a rush to bring it back in exactly the same form, with just the same flaw in it as before, which is that you are guaranteeing to create hundreds of empty spaces, to displace hundreds of cars with nowhere to go, and without any thought about any form of strategy and any sort of plan. And we all know the real reason why this is happening. It is no coincidence that the borders you've got for your MB and MC, and there's another zone on the side now, the borders of those exactly match Central South Sea Ward. Well, what a surprise that is, because Central South Sea Ward is a ward which the Liberal Democrats are in danger of losing to Labour, and that is why this is coming forward now in this form, and we are all very clearly aware of that. But why really should the parking situation across the whole of Southsea be messed up without any strategy just on the basis of that? Now, in your report, you talk about the MF zone, that's within my ward. On the numbers there, you refer to the previous surveys having 72 in favour and 82 against, although that is rather misleading because that's on very different boundaries. That only includes the half of that area which has the greatest level of congestion and doesn't include the other half. If you actually surveyed the whole thing right now on the boundaries that you've got, you would find something like a 2-to-1 vote against. That's the reality of it. Now, you know, whether that's right or wrong, that is what you would get. So where's the democracy then? So people living in that area, other areas in my ward, and indeed in your ward, would, if given the choice, would you like a residence parking zone, yes or no? At the moment would say no. But you're saying, well, we're not offering you that. The choice is, do you want a residence parking zone, or do you want to become a dumping ground for other areas? In fact, we've had this admitted by Lynn Stagg, who has publicly said on Facebook that, you know, a lot of people don't want residence parking at the moment, but they do when the displacement comes in from when other zones are created. Now, I actually think, I agree with what Charles Burns said, that if you are going to have, the choice really is between keeping things as they are or extending residence parking over a wide area. And by wide area, I mean potentially south of St James's Hospital, or maybe the whole of Portsea Island, or maybe the whole of the city of Portsmouth. But you can't do this incrementally. You have to have a plan, and you have to have, if you're, you know, you have to look at this as a wide area. You can't just keep doing street by street. I mean, if you do that bit, it's going to take you years to do it. You're going to do MB and MC first. It's going to be mayhem outside. They'll end up, the zones you've got there, MD and ME, will end up, and F, will end up voting for it as a result of the displacement. And guess what's going to happen then? Well, there will be areas around Festing Grove, Prince Albert Road, and so forth, where you won't be able to move for all the displaced vehicles. And then you're going to have to do those. So you're going to end up achieving the same thing, only it's going to take you 5 years to do it. And in those 5 years, people aren't going to be able to park anywhere. It's going to be absolute mayhem on the streets. So my plea to you is you need to go, don't do this today, go away and come up with a sensible plan, something which has defensible boundaries, something that might actually work. I'm conscious, speaking after me, they've got quite a number of administration councillors, so I just want to point out a few fake facts that might be about to be mentioned. One of those is about the process for this. Let's not forget, this meeting replaces one on the 12th, and the one on the 12th only couldn't proceed because it was struck out for being procedurally invalid. You would have had this done already without any deputations from Liberal Democrat councillors, and I came along to speak at that meeting on the 12th, a couple of other people, but without much in the way of publicity for it. This report wasn't withdrawn by the administration to make changes. It was withdrawn because it wasn't valid. It's interesting that the Festing Grove area has been taken out of the plan as well. I suspect that follows a roasting that the council leader got at the East Southsea Neighbourhood Forum. Now, but again, I mean, you know, I sit here as a ward member for that area, and I live in the residence parking zone myself. I'm quite happy with that. I think as a personal view, my personal view is I think there would be a lot of logic in having residents parking across the whole of Portsea Island. However,
Councillor Stubbs, just so you're aware, you've hit your 6 minutes. I'll let you go for another minute.
I'm
beyond
near
that-
the end. I'm near the end. But you know, you need to make the case. You need to make the case. You need to have a plan. The final thing I was going to point out, I didn't notice it till this whole thing started, is quite revealing. Is the title of the report has changed. So it's changed from the 12th. It was residents parking programme update, and now it's changed to residents parking consultation. So you've changed it from update to consultation because really, truthfully, that's what it actually was. It was an update on your plan telling people what you're going to do. You're now trying to give the impression it's a consultation. It's not. And I think you need to take this away and have another look at it and come up with something sensible and something which might work for the long term.
Thank you, Councillor Stubbs. Could I ask Councillor Matthew Winnington, also from Eastleigh and Cranes Water Ward, to come forward?
Thank you, Councillor Dowling. To start with, and obviously we've just heard an address from another Eastleigh and Cranes Water councillor. So, just to say, to start with, thank you to the programme for having on there the MF zone, which is within the wards. I disagree with Councillor Stubbs's analysis that I think there will be a push for residents parking in that zone. As he pointed out, the area that was talked to last time was a smaller area, and there at that time there was no residents parking in place in MC. I think any further consultation where that has already been put in place, a prompt survey after that's introduced will indeed show that people are in favour of it. Just on the MF zone, so there is a map out there which was related to the last meeting. My understanding is that the reason why the MF zone was made smaller and so didn't go all the way to Cromwell Roads was because then you would have a unwieldy parking zone of which part of it would be bordering Clarendon Road and the other Cromwell Road, which is, if you know anything about Eastleigh and Craneswater or anything about Southsea at all, you would know that they are two very unrelated areas and the parking issues in those areas are very separate. And my understanding again was that within the report they didn't want to include any further zones, so including that area to the east of Festing Road would make that more difficult because it would be an additional zone in the report. However, I would request, Councillor Dowling, that that we do state at this meeting today that the intention is that if any parking zone is introduced in the area that boards east of Festing Road, so between Festing Road and Cromwell Road, that if that's introduced, then there will be a prompt, and I mean very prompt, survey of that area to ask if they want a parking zone. Having talked to residents within that area, in particular the area around Salisbury Road, Bruce Road, Spencer Road and Helena Road, I do know the issues that they have in parking because of the seafront displacement, and I don't think they've been surveyed for at least 10 years, if ever. So I do think they are due that opportunity. And in the eastern part of the area near Cromwell Road, their last survey again was a decade ago, and some areas of that did actually vote for a parking zone at the time, but unfortunately there was an old procedure whereby there had to be a certain turnout, and that didn't reach it. So I do think that it would be right, Councillor Dowling, for that area to be surveyed and to be part of this rolling programme. But I do think that the most important thing about any parking zones, and and backing up what others have said before, that you can only have parking zones by consent. We have had parking zones in the past that have been imposed on residents. There have been the information that's came through on a citywide basis saying that people didn't want a citywide zone, which I think that approach is inappropriate. And I think it's all about empowering local residents to say if they want a parking zone that they should have one, and if they don't, they shouldn't. But it should be done in a way that they are fully, not just fully aware of the fact that there might be a parking zone being introduced next door, but also that they should be experiencing it. I think one of the issues with the previous consultation, where it included MF, was the fact that the zone was, that they were asked about MC before MC was introduced. They didn't actually know what the displacement would be. So therefore, I think that's really important that it is done in conjunction so they know what the displacement is going to be, because then they can be fully informed. But it should be done very promptly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Willington. Can I ask for Councillor Robert New from Copner Ward to come forward for his deputation? I'd like to thank councillors who have spoken so far for being so well behaved.
I know, that's what I thought. I feel bullied already. Well, you won't be surprised that I'm coming out. I'm not going to talk on MB and MC, but I am going to talk about HC, because this does, for me personally, Chair, and for the people watching this at home, this smacks of political opportunism. And the reason why I say this is because in the report, which has been highlighted that it has changed now, say consultation, it isn't consultation, and it details here that the last survey that was done in this area in the Baffins ward from Tokyo Road down to the Copner Bridge was done in 2009. That's nearly 10 years ago. It is a transient area, the south end of Copner, Baffins. Even though it's in Baffins ward, most of these people do think of themselves as being in Copner. And I think that for anything like this, we have to go out immediately when we're looking at these sort of programmes to do a proper consultation. And one of the things that I think I was most alarmed about was not only that the Traffic and Transport Cabinet member lives in this area, and so it does smack of, as long as I'm all right, mate, and I can park in the road that I want to park in, I don't care about the rest of them, because actually what this zone specifically will do is cause quite a lot of displacement, and actually it's going to cause displacement to the Copner side of the Copner Road, and that's really is throwing my residents under the bus, and that's not fair. And also north of Burfield Road as well, into those roads immediately adjacent on the other side of the bridge, which is connected into the road that Councillor Stagg lives in. It just seems grossly unfair to be able to try and push this through, and thank God, actually, you know, and I feel sorry for you officers, actually, because I watched the meeting back after the fiasco that ensued, and I can see that you were all very, very uncomfortable with this, and having been the previous administration and seeing the political pressures that were put onto you, I really feel sorry for you moving forward, because I think there's going to be a lot of disgruntled people as coming through from the area that I represent, also people from the Baffins ward as well, and as well as the wider city. And one of the things that I think I found the most disappointing is I saw this Tin Pot political survey that went out during the local elections, as everyone did, you know, and it's all very nicey, but it's very basic. But there have been times before when this city council had rejected political surveys that were presented on the basis of the one, they don't know whether they're actually made up or not, and actually thank you to the Liberal Democrat members who are disgruntled enough that have been leaking this information as well, so that we can make more informed presentations, I think, actually knowing where this has all come from. And I think we can tell from the fact that the report's changed in the way that it has, that you are uncomfortable as officers with implementing this, and the fact that you even had to put a disclaimer at the very start of the presentation of this meeting that this is a political priority set by the administration. And I know, even though you're here to serve, I can see that you're uncomfortable, and quite rightly so, because this will cause real problems across this city. And one of the other things I think that was further disappointing was the fact that over the last 2 years, a cross-party working group through the Text Committee, the Traffic Environment and Community Safety Committee, have been working and amassing a large amount of evidence, and I understand that they're ready to start to form their recommendations to present to Cabinet. The fact that a new administration has thrown that all out the window for the sake of small, short-term, petty political gain is not right. And so I would ask you to take this away. If you are going to proceed, which I suspect you're going to just push this through on the nod, that you really do go out to consultation and allow people to be heard, because as I can see here, you're trying to base some of this specifically for the area that I represent around information that is out of date, and I think Councillor Stagg is on very, very thin ice here.
Thank you, Councillor New. Could I ask Councillor Steve Pitch from Central Southsea Ward to come forward? And thank you to Tristan, who is disappearing to go to a meeting that I originally said I would go to before this meeting was scheduled. So my thanks to him. Councillor Pitt.
Thank you, Chair. From day one, when you get involved in campaigning in Central Southsea Ward, every door you knock on, the conversation is about parking, parking, parking. People who live there are probably better versed on the issue than anywhere else in the city. Something that was supported by the fact that we did a survey across 9 wards last summer, not during the local elections, it was last summer, and that of the 5,500 responses that we got citywide, well over 500 of those were from the MB/MC parking zone area as was. Which just goes to highlight just how important the issue is to people in that area. The other thing that they say to us very regularly is that they're not happy with the way that they've been treated historically. When the MB/MC zones were suspended, there was a letter that was sent out by the then Cabinet member, Councillor Elcombe, to one of our residents who was expressing their distress at losing the zone, to be told, if you don't like it, get rid of your car. This from a councillor who has off-road car parking up in his ward in Drayton and Farlington. We then have another Cabinet member for Traffic and Transport who also has off-road parking, and I've noticed that there are a number of deputations on the list today from other people who have off-road parking. Now, they are completely entitled to their opinion, but what about the opinion of the hundreds of people in Central Southsea Ward in what was formerly the MB/MC zone who do not have off-road parking and are sick to death of never being able to park remotely near their house? We're not talking about round the corner or up the road. We're talking about treks with bags of shopping, with relatives who have disabilities, all sorts of things that stop them from being able to lead normal lives. And we know why. Let's be honest, the reason that Central Southsea is particularly affected is it's because of one of the most densely populated council wards in Europe, and it has a ridiculously high percentage of HMOs in that area, which is why the whole 10% rule was brought in the first place, to address issues there and in St Thomas's ward. So with those HMOs, as Conservative councillors quite rightly raised at the Planning Committee only last week, they are furious that the regional inspector refuses to take seriously the allegation that HMOs add significantly to parking pressures. We know that the regional inspector utterly dismisses that as a view. So in the Planning Committee, they're quite happy to uphold that argument, yet when it's residents' parking zones in Central Southsea Ward, it's nothing to do with HMOs, nothing to do with the number of additional student cars, which sometimes are 5 or 6 to a house, with no ability to control them whatsoever. It's a complete non sequitur. We've actually had Councillor Stubbs today say, I live in a parking zone and I'm quite happy with that. Well, I'm sure he is, but the people in Central Southsea Ward are not, and their views need to be heard. They've responded time and time again to say that they want their residents' parking zones. Now, that said, it is absolutely crucial that we do have a rolling programme and that adjacent areas are surveyed promptly and effectively to make sure that we do not cause problems in neighbouring areas unnecessarily. Obviously, we take that on board as part of the survey that we did last year, of which there's been multiple accusations that it was never published. Yet I've got a copy here from MBMC Zone, and similar feedback was given to every single area in the city. So they were published, they were declared, and they were very clear that people are sick to death of nothing. 4 years of the previous administration, nothing except making the issue worse. We've heard today about a new zone that was introduced in Cosham, which wasn't done properly, according to the residents, and the residents are desperate to get that situation resolved. It's not joined up thinking to say that you can introduce a zone in the north of the city which will have no displacement, yet claim that every single thing you're going to do in the south of the city is. Either it is or it isn't. And for people to come and sit here and make deputations that make absolutely no logical sense whatsoever, I just find that absolutely extraordinary. We need to have a joined-up approach. We need a rolling programme. We need to address concerns. We need to free up capacity. And, of course, we need to do that with looking at other solutions for overnight parking, such as opening up alternative sites for vans and commercial vehicles to park, but also making sure that, as a council, we limit our own vehicles being parked on residential streets at night when they shouldn't be, and to work with other partners to find solutions so that fleet vehicles can remain in yards and it's smaller cars that are driven home to park. We all know what the problems are, we all know what the solutions are. Instead of making political games out of it, as has been done with these two zones for the last 4 years, let's correct a wrong and then start to put the whole thing right. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pitt. Councillor Hugh Mason from St Jude Ward.
Chairman, members, I want to talk about the MD ward, which is the north-eastern part of St Jude Ward of Southsea, the MD zone. When surveyed in 2014, which was the last comprehensive survey, there were 374 people in favour of residence parking, 160 against, and 26 couldn't make up their minds. I think this is a pretty conclusive proportion. Since then, there's obviously been a turnover in population, and I, as a ward councillor, like my other ward councillors, go around and knock on doors and talk to people. And if anything, the support for a residence parking zone in the MD area is stronger than it was 4 years ago. That being said, there are a couple of caveats which need to be taken into consideration. The first is that the reasons for and the timings for wanting a residence parking zone vary across the MD area. The strongest support for residence parking came from the Albert Grove, Chelsea Road, Exmouth Road and Inglis Road areas. Very strong, demanding parking restrictions, especially in the evenings. On other areas, there was much less of a concentration on evening parking. On the area west of Victoria Road South, there was problems with all-day parking. And some areas, such as those on Waverley Road, which are very similar to Gaines Road and Allens Road in the Eastern Craneswater ward, there was a very much weaker support, and indeed not in a couple of roads, not even a support at all for residents-only parking. So the ward is variable, and I think this should be taken into consideration when looking at how you are planning to implement a residence parking zone. What is suitable for some areas, such as Albert Road, Exmouth Road, in the evenings where there is a real problem, may not be suitable for some of the other areas where there is an all-day problem. This needs to be handled very carefully. The second area which we need to consider is the problem of the restaurants and especially the King's Theatre on Albert Road. This ties in with the areas which have a very strong support for evening residents-only parking. The King's Theatre and the restaurants are businesses which are important to this city, and their needs must be taken into consideration when planning a residence parking zone. There are ways forward, there are things which could be done. I will suggest three possibilities, but there are others. The first is that we have controlled parking on Albert Road in the evening. 3 hours parking will enable people to go to the theatre, they will enable them to have a meal in a restaurant, no return within, let us say, 4 hours. That would stop the problem of people coming in and just overnight parking and sometimes full weekend parking in these areas. Secondly, I think we need to consider the possibility of extending the park and ride into the evening with a changed route so it brings people into those areas where people congregate in the evenings, which is really the Palmerston Osborne Road areas of Southsea and the Albert Road area of St Jude Ward. We need to consider the possibility of doing that. Lastly, I think we need to have a look at the arrangements for Waitrose car park. Waitrose car park, which used to provide free parking in the evenings for people who are visiting the King's Theatre, and very much welcome so, no longer does. It should be not beyond the wit of this council to come to a sensible arrangement with Waitrose, who have the largest car park in the vicinity, to open that up in the evening, to enable people who are going to the King's Theatre or are going to the restaurants in Osborne Road and Palmerston Road and Albert Road to be able to park. These are issues which need to be taken into consideration, but they need to be taken into consideration alongside the fact that there is a massive support in this MD area for a residence parking zone. We need it. Most of the people I meet on the doorstep come with stories of having to park sometimes as far away as the seafront, sometimes using church car parks, sometimes using the Waverley, using the Wimbledon Park Sports Centre car park for overnight parking, because there is not enough to cope at the present time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. That brings me to the end of my current list, but I've just been informed Councillor Jones would like to speak as well. Would you like to come forward now, Councillor Jones? From Hilsey Ward.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dowling, and thank you for allowing me to speak at the last minute. I've just come from another meeting. I wasn't sure if I'd be able to get here today. Obviously, this is a really important issue, and it affects everybody in the city who owns a car. And in actual fact, it affects people in the city who are homeowners or tenants who don't even own a car, because your rent or your value of your house will often be affected by the parking situation. And if you are fortunate enough to have off-road parking, it increases the value. And if you don't, and you live in a place, as we've just heard from Councillor Pitt, very densely populated like Central Southsea, it can have a negative effect as well. I think the number of people here today supporting and against the proposed decision before you today indicates obviously the strength of feeling. And I just wanted to sort of give an alternative approach to this. Firstly, I want to start by saying how sympathetic I feel towards people who do live, for example, in Central Southsea Ward, in the roads, the residents we've heard from today. You know, it is not a nice situation. I've lived in roads in Central South, or a road in Central Southsea myself, many years ago. Parking was a nightmare, and that was 22 years ago. And I'd only just started driving at that point, and there were far less cars on the road then than there are now. And unfortunately, the situation in Portsmouth has got progressively worse. We are the most densely populated city in the UK outside of London. Our housing number and housing expectation delivery numbers from the government are going up. We know that they are in excess of 19,000 over the next 20 years, which I think is bonkers, but anyway, there you go. We're surrounded by water, so we can't go out, therefore we're probably looking at going up. When you go up, you get more dense, far more dense housing, and where do the cars go? So a solution, much improved public transport. That's what we really, really need, but we will never be able to deliver that from our own coffers, from our own money here in Portsmouth. We will need a significant amount of investment commitment from the government for that. So we are at the moment. We've got air pollution issues in Portsmouth. We've got parking problems. The crux of it is that there are too many cars on the road for the number of houses that we have, and we know that when this city was designed predominantly by Victorians and in the Georgian area, that they weren't designed to have cars, 1 or 2 cars per home. Now, in terms of some of the points that have been made today, commercial vehicles, yes, it is a huge aggravation, particularly if you live in a terraced house with no forecourt, so your front door is closer to the road, and you have a great big massive transit van parked outside of your house with the entire light on the front downstairs part of your house. Therefore, when the sun's in the wrong position, means that you have no sunlight in your house, and that actually can affect your quality of living quite substantially. We did take steps. I had a list created of the biggest companies in the city about 2.5, 3 years ago of commercial operating vehicles in this city. People like Virgin and BT and British Gas. And I wrote to those companies and I asked them to keep their vans in their depots at night to ease that pressure of vehicular parking, large vehicular parking on the street. Some of them were very polite, came back and said yes. In fact, 2 of them did. Whether or not they're still doing that, I think it's slipped again because it's more of a request. If they pay if they pay road tax and it's a non-resident parking area, of course the vehicle can be parked there. Schools, yes, we've looked at that. In my own ward, in Doyle Avenue, right opposite Northern Parade School, there was a piece of land that the council owns that we were considering, and I think we will build a care home on, and we have opened that up for community parking in the area. And we also spoke to the staff at the school and said, please park in the Mountbatten car park during the day, because again, it's publicly owned and it makes sense, and it just eases the pressure on street in my own ward in Hilsey. We reversed some of the parking schemes that had been put in before we were the administration in North End, because that reduced a lot of parking. We have opened up the car park behind the old fads in North End to create, again, more on-street parking, and we've put more parking in Ashling Lane in North End, again, to try and help. So over the last few years, we have tried to do things. Now, today, the decision before you, obviously, is to do yet more piecemeal parking zone. And for the people that are here, that live in those areas, undoubtedly that's the right thing to do. For people outside of the area, where you literally move the problem from this block of 10 roads onto the next block of 10 roads, it's not the right thing to do. And that's why you've heard today that under the 4 previous years, under the Conservative administration led by myself, no action was taken. That's simply not true. The citywide parking review has all but been concluded. It was due to come for a decision in March, and due to a change in the chairmanship of that committee and being caught up in PERDA, we were not able to conclude that. But had we have been the administration, by now that parking review would have been brought back, and it was a citywide parking review with a citywide strategy rather than just piecemeal parking. I really do think we need a whole life approach. Whether or not this report is agreed today, and if it is agreed, I would urge that approach to look at a solution across the whole city, which may well mean that the majority of the island ends up having a parking zone. Who knows, where that was going. But the committee were, I think, 1 meeting away from determining and concluding their report to bring it to the Cabinet for determination, and then possibly on to full council because of the impact. So I really would urge you, Councillor Dowling, on behalf of the administration, to take back that aspiration that we had to find a solution that's fair for everybody, that doesn't simply shunt the problem along the road, because that's often what happens with parking zones, and actually carry out consultation which is legal and thorough, not rely on information which is 4 years old, which I think is subject potentially to significant legal challenge, and also not to rely on data collected by a political party, wholly inappropriate for that to be relied upon when making a decision on behalf of a local authority. So that's my request. I wish you all the luck, because it's not a nice position to be in from your perspective when you've got this kind of veracity of feeling on either side. But thank you for allowing me to speak at such short notice.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. That is the end of our formal deputations for today. I just want to make people aware that myself and colleagues have also received 29 written deputations, which we've had opportunity to read through over the past few days. Just in terms of process for the rest of this morning, or although I think we're now into the afternoon, I was going to ask officers if you are both happy to respond to some of the things that we've heard, and then we'll move to a sort of an open questions and comments section. If I feel like we're getting too far away from the actual topic, then I will ask us to kind of bring that back so that we can stick to the report that is in front of us. But I appreciate there are a number of surrounding issues that may well be relevant. Is everyone content with that, particularly the two of... Yeah? Okay, wonderful. Pam, I could see you were writing furiously, as was I. Would you rather kind of respond to what you feel you can respond to, or do you want me to ask you specific questions on particular things? I'm happy either way.
Okay, thank you. There was a couple of points that I think it might be worth us going through because they seem to come up a number of times, and then there was a couple of points that were specifically asked for in terms of clarification. So if I
So if you do what you think you've got on your list, and then I might have other things to ask as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wonderful.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you very much for the deputations that we've heard today. It's been incredibly helpful for us. Councillor Ashmore, you had a couple of points that you were requesting clarification on, and it was echoed in a number of the other deputations, firstly relating to what is prompt consultation, specifically if displacement is experienced in adjacent areas. Any amendment to the programme that is proposed, if that programme is approved, would need to come back to this forum, and at that point the priority would be assigned to the areas experiencing displacement. And your other question about alternatives being considered, yes, absolutely. Aspects such as reviewing double yellow lines is an ongoing process, and that is done as part of the day job, essentially, of a number of different officers. And also, as Councillor Jones mentioned, the TEX scrutiny panel is obviously looking at the citywide review, and a number of areas have been explored through that, and we anticipate other aspects being identified through that when that comes back to the Council. There was another point which I think Councillor New you articulated regarding consultation, but again that was picked up in a number of different deputations, and it was just to clarify what is proposed within this report. So essentially, as I mentioned in the introduction, there's a two-stage approach and a three-stage approach. For those areas where there have been more than 2 surveys, be they informal or formal, undertaken in the last 5 years, they will be going straight to traffic regulation order statutory consultation. For all other areas, even though they have been surveyed, if it is longer ago than 5 years or doesn't meet the 2 years within the 2 surveys within the 5-year period, they will have an informal survey first.
Thank you, Pam. So one of the key themes coming through from a number of people, including Councillor Jones, Councillor Pitt, I think Councillor New, and others, was around other solutions to parking in the city. Can you just confirm that moving forward with today's recommendations around consultation on residence parking zones does not in any way preclude us as a council pursuing other solutions to parking problems in the city?
Yes.
Wonderful. So overnight van parking, removing double yellow lines, single yellow lines where we have bus stops, school parking, etc., etc., are all things we can still look at, and that's not affected by whether or not we move forward today.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. We have a series of officers who are involved in residence parking, but the much wider department is also involved in other elements around improving public transport, and looking at behaviour change, improvements to walking and cycling routes. So that there's a breadth of work that goes on which will essentially inform that and enable us to implement schemes around alternatives to residence parking to mitigate the issues experienced.
Thank you. We heard in great detail a perspective from Mr. Barfoot in relation to Mulberry Lane and the Close. Not being a Cosham expert, would you be able to just shed some light on what he described as 18 months of no action, as I'm sure that I'm sure, as with many things in life, the truth will be somewhere in between four people's opinions of something. So I would love to hear just a bit of detail about what has happened around that. I think that's fair to Mr. Barfoot, as he took the time to come down and speak to us.
I think the answer to that is that we have been working through the residence parking programme approved in 2015, and the progress on that, as Pan said, is in the table. It's the grey boxes to start with, and that's what we've been working through. Obviously, the new administration's priorities are prioritised first within this report, and following that is the existing programme we had. And what we said was when we're in a position to add new areas to the residence parking programme, that's what we would do. So it's not a case that we haven't been doing anything in the last 18 months. In the last 3 years, the progress that's been made on residence parking is noted in this report.
Okay, so my follow-on question is, when this programme of consultation comes back to this meeting after, let me see, the King's area, where it says interim progress report to be taken to TNT, can we include something in there around Mulberry Lane?
Yeah, I think I'd refer you to paragraph 4.9 of the report, where it says, there have been requests from local ward councillors and residents for a consultation on residence parking in the following wards, and these consultations will be progressed when resources allow. So then when we next come back, as you say, with an interim report, we can maybe look at those areas that have asked for residence parking that aren't currently included.
Wonderful. So there's a clear process there that we can take forward. Other areas that aren't necessarily currently highlighted in this report and on the map that's been circulated. Wonderful. Okay, let me see, where did I get to? Apologies, I always get to the point in these meetings where I suddenly realise I can't read my own notes because I don't have to write anything since university. We had some kind of a query around from Charles, sorry, apologies, Mr. Burns, in relation to is it possible to survey the entire city? My understanding is that we came to a conclusion a number of times under a number of administrations around resources on that point. Could you just pick that up?
Ben, it was survey the N areas of Southsea, really the...
So the whole of Central Southsea ward?
Done before, not the whole city.
Okay, so the whole of Central Southsea ward. Yeah. I mean, my reading of what's in front of us is that, in effect, that is what will happen, because MB and MC will be consulted, and then, depending on the result of those consultations and any zone that is or isn't put in, that the immediate areas, which essentially is the rest of Central Southsea ward, will then be consulted. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right, that essentially it will happen sequentially. I mean, a number of surveys, as has been picked up by a number of the deputations, have happened over the last many years. We have undertaken citywide surveys. One of the most recent ones was through the Text Committee, looking at parking. A citywide survey was undertaken. In terms of looking specifically at the Central Southsea area, generally we consult in manageable areas in terms of enforcement, to look at it that way, so people understand what the boundaries of the zone would be, and we consult on a zone-by-zone basis.
Okay, wonderful. We've also had Mr. Norton. Charles, last opportunity, because I do need to then keep going.
The point I was trying to make, and sorry if it wasn't clear enough, is to survey the 5, or including 6 if you include MA areas, and look at the possibility of them being brought in as 2 or perhaps 3 resident parking zones, and what that could pick up the point Hugh was making about some of the area might have different requirements, serving the businesses in the King's Theatre area, which was the bit that came out of MC. But just doing MB and MC, then rolling it forward from there, you end up with the same mess you've got at the moment. And really,
okay, I think I've got the point. My understanding is that the problem with consulting the entire area is that you can't really consult them on a specific zone. Is that, so you can't go to the whole of Central Southsea ward and say, do you want a parking zone, because you then can't outline what that parking zone would look like. Is that a fair
Yes, it's not manageable really to do it in that way, because a number of the deputations have asked that the zones are specifically tailored to the needs of those particular areas, and that's very much what we endeavour to do, and to make it locally specific to the issues experienced in the areas, to make sure that it's not a one-size-fits-all policy, that we are actually looking to the specific conditions of the potential zone, to understand from the residents when their particular issues are in terms of parking, so that we can really make it quite nuanced and quite specific, a bespoke solution to their areas.
Okay, and I'm assuming we're not at year zero. We've been talking about parking in the city for many years, and I'm assuming that the zones that are recommended for consultation in this paper are based on prior experience that the department has, and it's not just a case of a person drew some lines.
No, that's it. I mean, one of the reasons for the two-stage approach, the two different approaches to consultation, is the fact that within that 5-year period, obviously, subsequent, a number of consultations were undertaken, providing us with a bank of information. In addition to that, obviously, we record and analyse all the correspondence that we get on an ongoing basis. So we do have a lot of information. So it's exactly for that reason that we've got the two different approaches available. And the areas where we feel that the information is too old, perhaps, we are suggesting that an informal consultation is undertaken first, which will bring our information that we do have up to date and enable us to design the zones effectively for the current conditions in those areas.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I've only got one, possibly two more points, and then I'm very happy to open up to colleagues. Councillor Winnington talked about the area, well, both Councillor Winnington and Councillor Stubbs talked about the area to the, that's my east and west, right, east of Festing Grove, and which was previously, so a couple of weeks ago, we issued an MF zone that looks quite large, and that's been reduced because they're two very different areas. Can we just confirm that alongside, I suppose it's the same situation as the Mulberry Lane scenario, that if what is currently MF does get a parking zone, and obviously that would be after they've had informal consultation, TRO consultation, and a decision made at TNT, that if that were to happen, the neighbouring area would then be subject to consultation.
Yes, it's the same answer as for the Mulberry Lane issue, that the programme can be amended through this forum to give priority to different areas and to amend the prioritisation order as it currently stands.
Wonderful, thank you very much. And then my final one is around the TEX report. For those that aren't aware, we have a, correct me if I'm wrong, Simon, I get the name of your panel wrong, the Traffic, Environment and Community Safety. Yeah, so we have a scrutiny panel that looks at decisions the council makes over a rolling programme, and that's decided by people that are not the administration. So I have no say in what those scrutiny panels look at, and one of those topics has been parking over the last couple of years. I don't know if either officers or Simon, you may want to just weigh in here about kind of where that report has got to, because my understanding is that we will see it quite soon, and I believe I saw a draft of it that didn't say too much about residence parking zones, which is why I was fairly comfortable with moving this forward, but I'm very happy to hear your view on that.
I'm fascinated that a member of the administration has actually seen a report that is actually confidential and shouldn't be going anywhere near the administration, but hey-ho, we are where we are in this current age. I'll be looking very closely at Lib Dem members on that particular panel then. The Text Committee next meets on Thursday.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm happy to open this up to the floor. Colleagues? The floor as in the two of you, yes. Who wants to go first? Don't all rush at once.
I have a few questions for officers, if I can. They probably would be disappointed if I didn't. This report is effectively setting out a programme, so it is basically a timeline of when these will actually be reported on, consulted, optimised, to use a phrase, going forward. A couple of questions before I get to that part, though. 4.1, if residents report issues with displacement parking from residents' parking zones, then they will be surveyed promptly to understand those issues, which sort of brings us to MF. Now, 2 to 3 weeks ago, MF was, as we've heard, a significantly bigger zone. It seems to have been, in the last fortnight, arbitrarily cut in half. First question is, why and who made that decision?
The previous report, as you know, was withdrawn, and we had an opportunity to present and pull together this report, which we felt would better reflect the administration's priorities and how they wanted to approach this issue.
Thank you very much, Councillor Turton.
And as a member of the administration, I just want to say that, and Councillor Winton brought this up, and in many ways, Councillor Stubbs actually highlighted that these are two different areas with kind of different groupings of people that live in those areas and experience different problems in relation to parking. But I want to re-emphasise, I think what you've said around 4.1 is absolutely key to this whole discussion, is that areas that find themselves with issues in relation to displacement will be surveyed promptly to understand those issues. And if that then means they go through the same process of 2 consultations and then a decision by someone in a public meeting, then I think that there is some clear democracy there.
That didn't make any sense to me at all, to be quite honest, Councillor Dowling. But
if a zone goes in, Simon, there's displacement in another area,
I know exactly what 4.1 means, but there are a few questions I want to ask around that particular issue, if I can, Councillor Dowling. The point that I was making is that clearly MF, when it first came through a couple of weeks ago, was a significantly large area that would have been drawn up by officers with information relating to that. And in the space of 2 weeks since the last meeting, it's suddenly been cut in half. Now, with respect, I don't believe that officers would have made that decision, because it's basically saying we made a big goof 2 weeks ago, and I don't believe that is true of any traffic and transportation officer. But we move on to the point, and it comes back to the phrase that we've got in a lot of these, which is optimised operation of parking zones, which I assume includes things like perhaps changing the hours of operation, and it may well include some displaced roads such as Mulberry Avenue and Mulberry Lane and the Close, if that's what's particularly requested. Now, the zone that applies to that particular area is the one, I believe, which is BA, Park Grove, north of Knowlesley Road, Cossam, which is probably the area closest to it in that respect. But I come back to 4, which is actually in the programme. But I come back to 4.1. If residents, and I'll mention it again, if residents report issues with displacement parking from residents' parking zones, then they will be surveyed promptly to understand those issues. And it ties back in to MF, because we've heard 2 deputations, both of which have highlighted that and the demographics. But what we're basically saying here is we've halved the size of it, and if those people that are in the bit that are no longer included, and there's a very good written deputation from Dr. Moore if people want to have a look at that, then those people will then be promptly surveyed once the displacement happens, and the displacement will be inevitable. The same argument applies with HC, in so much that if you actually look at the other side of Copner Road, where you've got everything from sort of Queen's Road all the way up to Stubbington Avenue, are going to suffer from displaced parking. So therefore, there will be a request there for prompt consultation. They will be, by the nature of that, inserted into the programme rather than added to the end of it to actually satisfy the comments made by Councillors Ashmore and Winnington. So therefore, people like Mr Barfoot, who's sitting in Cossam and is already in the programme, will find his particular request shunted further and further down the programme, because other areas created by displaced traffic all over Liberal Democrat wards will actually be prioritised over his. Now, the question is, how much time, and I probably can't answer that, by certainly inserting MB and MC with the TROs and MF and MD, which are all additions into the programme, and therefore the prompt requests that are going to come in from areas around that, those people that are on the list waiting for optimisation, how far are they likely to get shunted back in their wait to be included because these areas are being prioritised over them?
It's very difficult to give accurate timescales for the introduction of RPZs. It depends on a number of factors, ranging from the number of resources that the City Council allocates to that function, but also the size of the zone, the number of consultation responses, as you might imagine. The table in 4.8, which outlines essentially the work that has been undertaken over the past 3 years, gives perhaps an indication of the number of zones that we can do, which is about 13 across a 3-year period. But obviously that is purely a guide, but does accurately reflect what we have been able to achieve. So perhaps an average of, optimistically, 4 a year.
Well, at the start of the report and the table in 4.8, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on page 5 that have actually been done, and then we move into MB, MC and the others. They are effectively 6 that were done in September 15 to June 18, 2.5 years. So we're averaging somewhere in the region of about 3 a year on that sort of basis. So the introduction of MB, MC, MD, MF, well, there's 4 there, so it's going to set the programme back for everybody else by at least a year, if not 18 months, you're actually waiting on it, because we have a political prioritisation system going on here at the expense of everybody else. Okay, but if I can just change tact, if I can, Councillor Dowling. Councillor Ashmore highlighted GA zone, and the fact he referred to the 2015 TRO consultation on the size of it, and pointing out that there were a serious number of objections against that. Well, a TRO is effectively a prescribed, this is what we are going to do unless you say you don't want it. So it sort of assumes the negative. On that basis, it lays out where it's going to be, when it's going to be in operation. So it's legislative in that's the way, and the fact that it won't go ahead if the people object. So you're looking for the negative vote. But if we look at MB, at the TRO that was actually done in 2011, which led to MB being put in, and it's here in the report, consultation 8 in support, 546 objections. So it sort of doesn't stack up in the way that actually goes. So I can imagine that report, when it came forward, was probably not recommending that it actually proceeded, which is probably why no Traffic and Transportation Officer actually signed off the report that went to the Cabinet member at the time. But we sort of are where we are. A lot has been made of surveys. Councillor Dowling himself has been quoted in the paper about an extensive survey carried out last summer and autumn. Councillor Pitts made reference to it. In fact, most of the Liberal Democrat councillors have made reference to this survey as a justification to bring in several zones, new zones, and bring zones in.
Several areas for consultation by the City Council. To be clear, we're talking about a report for a programme of consultation, including a 3-step consultation officers have outlined, including an informal survey by Portsmouth City Council, and the TRO process, which includes a consultation.
Or question to the officers, if I can. Does that mean, from what Councillor Dowling's just said, that MB and MC will be subject to the informal consultation stage, or will they be going straight to TRO?
Simon, we've already heard this question. You know very well that it's been consulted twice within the last 5 years by the City Council, not just by councillors or a political party, and on that basis, they are going straight to our TRO. That question has been answered and asked twice already.
The point that I'm making is a lot of the deputations have been based on a political survey, and I'm asking the question is, where is that survey? Because that survey was referred to in the previous report from 2 weeks ago, but it seems to have been taken out in favour of old data. which I have to say I've spoken to the data department, for want of a better expression, who have serious concerns about the viability of this and are questioning whether it's actually GDPR compliant in actually what we're putting forward. Certainly the Lib Dem survey is not, but that's a moot point in what we're talking about. But if you want to crack on and do this, by all means do this, but certainly Councillor Stagg is on record as saying that we need a more coherent process. I think there was actually another comment made by another one of the Liberal Democrats. I'm just trying to find out who actually said it. It was yes, Councillor Ashmore, strategically placed zones. But what we're actually doing is a piecemeal approach going forward. And MF is the prime example of that, where we're just going to bolt bits on and bits on and bits on and have people screaming. And my sympathies go to the traffic and transportation officers who's going to be subjected to the misery of this. Somehow I suggest that it might be a good idea that this was actually pulled back and forgotten about, bearing in mind that you're going to put out a prescribed TRO in MB and MC in the month of August, because that's where we're going with this, which is the holiday month, so it's hardly liberal and hardly democratic, to use Councillor New's phrase. Pull this back, do it properly, perhaps wait for the text report recommendations, which you haven't seen, and actually look for a coherent approach going forward.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bosher. I'm glad you think that parking zones should be forgotten about, and I'm sure residents across the city will be pleased to know that. Councillor Chowdhury.
I didn't say that at all, Councillor Dowling, and you know that.
People are very welcome to go back and watch the live stream. Councillor Chowdhury.
Thank you, Chair. I hear the deputation, and I got few emails from the residents objection about this plan for the scheme. So I don't want to ask any question. I'd like to recommend, because if we put forward this decision, maybe affect other sides. So why don't we take the formal survey to get public opinion and get the right decision? That's all.
Pam, did you want to come in on that?
No, I think that's right. I mean, the programme stipulates which consultation will be undertaken in each of the different zones, with MB and MC coming forward firstly to the formal statutory consultation.
So just to clarify, Councillor Chowdhury, what we have in front of us is a programme of consultation. So residents will always be asked what their view is once, if not twice, before a zone is even comes to a public meeting for a decision on a zone being implemented. Today is purely about a programme of consultation so that residents do have their say. Any further comments or questions from colleagues? Okay. So thank you very much to everyone. I just wanted to bring in one final question, because I mentioned earlier that we've had 29 deputations, and it was alluded to that we had one from a Dr. Nick Moore as well, and I'm very grateful for people to write into us. I think there was one particular point in that deputation around doctors' parking, and I think that brings into question a wider discussion around what you could argue is key worker parking. Lifeguards come into mind as well, and I believe this is something else we've looked at previously. Is that correct? And are continuing to look at?
Yes.
Wonderful. On which case, just to clarify for everyone's position, this is about approving a report which recommends consulting a series of people throughout the city to have a view on whether or not they would like a residence parking zone, and it does not in any way preclude the other efforts the council can make to improve parking in the city. And I know we as an administration, actually I would assume the whole council is very keen that we work to improve our network, including parking for all residents. So with that in mind, I'd like to approve the two recommendations. The first, that the progress on the previously approved residence parking programme is noted, that being between September 15 and June 2018, and that the fully revised residence parking programme is confirmed and commences with consultation on each area listed in Appendix A. Thank you very much, everyone.
downstairs.